So I would like to start the first session of the meeting today. And I'm very happy to be able to welcome Professor Michael Grubb from the University College of London. He's going to make a presentation about economics of innovation and transition. And this is really about how we could achieve these very ambitious but important goals of keeping global temperature changes down to only 1.5 degrees. And I know that Michael, he's one of the most important experts in climate change. I have known Michael for almost 30 years now, and he has always been a very important person in this. So I'm happy to give the floor to Michael.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kirsten. And yes, I think we realize now we have a long history in some of these issues. Can you hear me okay? And can you see the slides that I have prepared on the screen? Shall I assume that's going to...
I cannot see them.
Okay, do I need to reshare the slides? Let me just redo that. That should be shared now.
It's fine now.
That's fine. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you for the organizers. And yes, although I think some of us have been in this field for a long time, I think it's also true to say that there's always new things to say, new insights emerging from research. And what I want to talk you through is the results in part of research over the last few years on first some of the, if you like, more recent evidence and theoretical understandings around innovation, the expansion into the wider perception of transition of whole systems. I'll probably, in the interest of time, skip the UK electricity transition, though it does illustrate some of the points, and hopefully end up with a point about some of the implications specifically for policy measures, as well as the wider context for them. So now, if that will... my screen will move here. Oh, that is not responding in the way that I'd expected. There we are. It was just a little slow. Okay, so let me just start by a quick reminder drawn from the energy sector, which is, I pose sometimes as a question for audiences, but what do all the following energy technologies have in common? I won't really ask the audience, many of you may know, one of which is they've all turned out to be much cheaper than anyone really expected or predicted, or indeed put into models in the early stages. And the second is that they all involve government action at significant scale over many years, and that government role was on both technology and resource development and on the demand for or subsidy for the initial deployment of those technologies. And so that seems a general theme. I'm going to put in one slide just to underline a point that this is an issue particularly around energy sector. What I have on the left here is an indication of the extent to which different sectors spend money on their research and development. So this is private sector investment. At the top, you see some sectors which are well known for being innovative, like pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, information technology, computers, and so forth. Typically spend 10 to 15% of their revenue on innovation. Whereas we are trying to get radical change in the sectors at the bottom, which have historically spent maybe 1% or less of their total revenues on innovation. There are structural reasons for that. I won't talk through in depth, but on the right-hand side is a very stylized indication of the fact that underlying this reality is that that first class of sectors are ones where the technology development cycle is relatively quick and easy to connect with consumer demand for new products. In energy, we tend to have neither of those in general. We have technologies which are often quite expensive to develop, quite long time scales. And if we just think of the history of nuclear or CCS, you know, big money, lots of time, lots of risk. And at the end, they're basically trying to sell the same product of electrons or molecules. So there's very little direct consumer pull. So I just put that up at the beginning because sometimes we face arguments that, well, government shouldn't be too involved in the innovation process because markets, private sector does it. That's true in some sectors, not unfortunately in most of the sectors we're trying to transform. Still a hugely important role for private investment and innovation, but government does play a significant role. We have seen breakthroughs. Of course, and this is just a reminder with an extract from charts from the IPCC mitigation report of the remarkable progress in solar and onshore wind energy. The cost declines are shown on the top panels and compared to the range of fossil fuel prices before the crisis. So you can imagine now in most parts of the world, we find that new renewables are actually substantially cheaper than the cost of electricity from fossil fuels. That's certainly the case in Europe, and it's causing lots of interesting issues. At the bottom is an indication of the pace of scale of growth, and you see a lot of the decline in costs has been associated with the rate of growth. And in wind energy, that rate has been around 20%, in solar for a period of 40% a year. And I'll say a word about that in a second. On the right-hand side, I've added that the same has been true of batteries and to an extent, therefore, also electric vehicles. I think most of this audience will know that, but it's still worth the reminder of how much has changed and also how it changed, which is covered in part in the IPCC reports. What I want to move on in the second section of this talk is some brief case studies that we've been conducting in the context of this program called the Economics of Energy Innovation and Systems Transition. So I'll be drawing on a report that we launched at the Glasgow COP26 report. You can see it's got quite a wide range of authors, including authors from 3 of the major emerging economies, India, China, and Brazil. The purpose of this whole research program is to try and move forward the debate on energy innovation and transition as a more positive economics framing and reality indeed for the challenge of climate change. So we absolutely tried to build upon the evidence. We looked at the history of wind and also looked at the international role. So in this case, we looked at the relationship between UK, Europe and Brazil, which was a country that entered the wind energy business in about 2003 after an energy crisis. Both of those regions, wind energy has grown from less than 1% to over 10%, 15% now in Europe in the space of barely a decade. And that history was a long history of both push and pull policies on technology, ranging right from research and development, industrial collaboration, industry building, important role for public-backed banks in contracts in financing the growth. We see cumulative improvement, we see globalization of the market, the financial dimension is crucial, and more recently, big breakthroughs in offshore wind that I'll touch on, building upon that progress onshore. On the right-hand side, we have important progress, not just on demand side, on supply side, but also, let's not forget, demand side. Energy efficiency is crucial. We actually, again, traced the history somewhat of energy efficiency in India. stimulated in part at first by the Kyoto Protocol's clean development mechanism, which helped to fund both projects and institutional interest and development for energy efficiency. In the Indian context, it was vital that was linked to the drive for modern energy services, modern lighting, and the Indian government, building upon that experience and the technology progress, undertook a bulk procurement program with smart policy that drove an 85% reduction in the procured cost of lighting emitting diodes, which means it has now been, I think, rightly described as the cheapest lighting in history. That phrase is one that you may well have heard in relation to solar energy as being the cheapest electricity in history, quote from the IEA in the right circumstances. And that's the third historical case study that we trace through. And again, similar lessons emerging, long evolution from R&D through niche commercialization, through expansion, driving market scale. Crucially, even more in this case, the internationalization of production, particularly as the Europeans were driving consumer demand at scale with feed-in tariffs. Chinese industry moved in, became very effective at production, and that in turn also led to China rapidly expanding its domestic ambition, building upon its domestic production capacity, and thereby the globalization of solar that we now see. So, I mean, obviously, this is a very, very quick summary, but the lessons are rather similar in each case about the interaction of both technology push and demand pull policies. If I look a little more closely at the offshore wind energy case in the UK, where we've seen remarkable progress again from only 10 years ago or 10, 15 years ago, the first long-term contract for offshore wind, about £170 per megawatt hour, and the cost has come down by a factor of at least 3, probably 4 for the most recent auctions. And when we worked a bit with some of the industries involved in this, they said there are 4 main factors. There was absolutely research and development was crucial, particularly the earlier stages, but continuing as new challenges and problems emerged. Learning by doing from the early offshore deployment of wind farms, not all of which worked well, but you often learn from elements of failure. Then economies of scale as the industry expanded, bigger turbines, bigger wind farms, better switch stations, bigger, longer supply chains, more sophisticated development of those supply chains at scale. And finally, the financing costs as financial industry became more confident that the technology would really work, that there was also a stable policy regime supporting these technologies. All of those were crucial to this remarkable breakthrough, which has really transformed the economics of zero carbon electricity, not just for Britain, but across Northern Europe at least, and in other parts of the world. So if I summarize the broad lessons from those case studies, those historical case studies, led by strong government action, all of them now largely self-sustaining. An analytic point, they would not have been pursued under traditional economic cost-benefit assessment. Indeed, one of the slides I'm skipping has quotes from economists saying that this was crazy, this was ridiculously economic, ridiculously uneconomic as a way of reducing emissions. And some of those only 10 years ago, is that what was being said? So recognizing the power of innovation, crucial, recognizing it's built on cumulative progress. It's not just research and development. It's often market-based with the right supports. The targeted support has to typically last for at least a decade or two beyond the emergence from primarily R&D technology push. There are, of course, substantial uncertainties. None of us could fully predict these kind of breakthroughs, and there were strong international dimensions. And in fact, often it was the process of internationalization that really sustained the growth of the technologies and helped them pass critical cost reduction thresholds. Just one other word, because one could argue that, well, a few case studies is a limited base of evidence. we conducted quite a major systematic review of the literature in this area, looking at all of the different literatures and potential connections relating different forms of demand pull to technology progress. And that was right through from energy prices, carbon prices, impacts on innovation indices, through to more targeted measures like renewable tariffs, the learning curves literature, and some macroeconomic. And in all cases, there is frankly unambiguous evidence, partial exception of the last one where the data is more complicated, but by and large, unambiguous evidence of the really important role of demand expansion in cost reductions. This should not really be a surprise. It was predicted in 1932 that you would expect innovation to respond to market incentives, and that is exactly what we see. And yet it's still limited how much that is included, for example, in some of the global modeling. Now, if I offer one way of thinking about the processes going on here and the overall economics, I sometimes use this diagram. So this is from the first report of that EAST program. What it shows vertically is on the far left, for example, a new technology which is currently twice as expensive, perhaps, as conventional. And yet over time, which is the x-axis, and with cumulative annual output learning from all that, then the cost will come down. And at some point, there is reasonable expectation they will start to be competitive with established technologies. The cost benefit of this, the costs up front are effectively the investment in that sort of quadrant at the top left, because that's the product of the cost difference with the time and scale. The benefits are the much larger volumes you can see on the right-hand side. And just to stress, yes, those benefits will absolutely be bigger and they will start to emerge sooner if there is also a carbon price in the system. But it's not really the carbon price that's in itself driving the innovation, although it certainly helps. Worth stressing, of course, all of this is a nice conceptual diagram. The scales would vary for different technologies and markets, and there is inherent unpredictability in some of this. You can't know exactly how much you have to invest up front, exactly when the breakthroughs and competitiveness will occur. So that is one reason why in the whole program of work, we talk about shifting the framework of evaluation from cost benefit to risks and opportunities. There are risks, but clearly there are opportunities as well from these kind of strategic investments. So if I now try and run you through a little bit more of the underlying theory on this. First, a simple stylized way to stress there are in the literature and sometimes in people's minds different caricatures about how innovation happens. Either, so the A here, you on the left-hand side, you just put R&D money in, the price of the technology drops, and then you diffuse it vertically. The other caricature is a pure market forcing that all we really need is to put on something like a carbon price, and then there'll be more scale and the cost will just drop overnight once the incentives are right. The reality is most technologies evolve through a whole series of steps, gradual improvement, new scales, new learning, new consumer base emerging, cost falls and improvements, you can expand further. So in the middle, you see this sense of an iterative path of cost reduction as the scale grows. And that is, frankly, the normal reality. We shouldn't really expect anything else. It can be a complicated process, can be lots of feedbacks, but it is still quite useful to think in terms of what the literature calls the innovation chain. And depending upon which bits you're really interested in, you can look in more or less depth So there's a whole literature on innovation systems, which is largely concerned with the relation of invention, technology development and demonstration, and initial commercialization. Actually, I think from our studies, we'd say that the last three steps, the relationship of commercialization, which is not a trivial step, I can absolutely assure you, and the market accumulation, the deployment of technologies at a growing scale to help bring down costs before you reach a stage of global diffusion, that is really crucial. You will tend to see some shift in the balance of financing associated with this. So the purple tends to involve more direct government funding in the technology push side of things. The latter phase is more of a market-based pool with a lot more private money coming in, but which may still well depend on the government investment. So it's at one level a fairly straightforward picture, but of course the reality of how the public and private, how the technology push and pull relates to each other is more complex. If I take that idea of the innovation chain with those 6 stylized steps, then the point then becomes it's not just about technology. In fact, there are many other journeys that we have to go through. The organizations have to change as they develop supply chain. You may start with very small ventures in some of these technologies, which gradually go. I'm not going to talk you through all of this, but you get the point. Many things need to change in organization. The customers will be very limited at the beginning, if any, and there may be no standards. As you go through this, one is developing a customer base, new niche markets potentially growing, more demand for standards so that people have confidence in what they're being asked to buy. The financing, the type of finance at the early stage is very different from the type of finance going into, say, really big investments in something like large offshore wind farms. And it's only in the last stages that there is a natural profit generation process. Then the regulation of the markets need to adapt and develop to be appropriate for the new kinds of technologies. There will be institutional developments. We'll start with emphasis upon the structuring of research, but then you're into issues about trade bodies to support and lobby for further enhancement of these technologies, and the institutions around governance of larger corporations involved. And finally, the infrastructure to help these technologies make the best use of the technologies. And in many examples, but we need a stronger grid infrastructure. We'll need charging infrastructure for electric vehicles and so forth. And I've indicated on the left, these have some relation to the different types of economic decision making that are mapped out in a book that we published a while ago. They referred to 3 domains of decision making, and the middle area is those most familiar to traditional economic thinking, but the others are just as important. If I add a bit more about the stylized dynamics of these transition processes, it's worth, and here I'm referring to in part reports from 2, 3, 4 years ago, when businesses approached us, some organization called We Mean Business, and said, well, so much of the academic literature seems to be on a fairly sort of long-term, but ultimately fairly static modeling. And the concern is that new technologies are very small, and people saying, so we're not making progress. As a business, you're really interested in the stuff that may look small now, but is growing rapidly, because there is a dynamic unleashed. Those are the areas where profits are bigger. You don't want to be in what is a declining industry where profits are shrinking. So what are the analytic frameworks for understanding the dynamics of these transition processes? So we published a couple of reports which are quite simple in concept. They take this basic idea of an S-curve as illustrated on the right. That is a typical shape for expansion of a new technology. It may culminate at full potential if the whole system adapts. It may be constrained if you don't adapt, for example, the infrastructure. But always you'll get some kind of pattern like this. And the question emerges, where are we in this process? So we looked at the data on this one on wind energy, capacity on the left, generation on the right, which, was still pretty small globally. But we said, but how fast is it growing? Because the initial stage in these processes is one of exponential growth. Most of this audience has a technical background. You can easily plug numbers in to realize or intrinsically know the power of exponential growth. It's very different from linear. So we just looked on the left, typical growth rates for wind energy had been around 20% a year in terms of what we call in the logistics S-curve dynamic mathematics, the emergence rate. It's about 20% a year growth. And we simply said, if we project that, that's the blue dotted line going forward, plus or minus 5% change in the emergence growth rates, where do we get to? And then we did the same exercise for solar, looking at the historical growth rates, which were nearer 30% or over, in fact, significantly over 30%. But we just put as the central, if solar were to go on this S-curve dynamic with an emergence rate of 30% a year, what would it look like? And the striking thing, and there's both capacity and generation here, is just how much impact it would make, even by 2030, if this actually is the dynamics of what is going on. It's still modest globally, although in the IPCC, we observed that wind and solar were already 8 or 9% of global electricity, but that's nothing compared with what they could be by 2030 even. So it's really a pretty dramatic change, and many people don't quite seem to realize what is coming. Finally, in a subsequent report, we also looked at the electric vehicle transition. Again, electric vehicles, both as share of sales and driving, have been going exponentially. It's an earlier stage. That also means it's less certain exactly what the sustainable emergence growth rate will be, but it appeared to be on the order of 40% a year, which again accumulates very dramatically. So if we now say, okay, so we have a typical S-curve dynamic that can happen at varied rates according to the characteristics of technologies. What more can we say about this? Well, I just want to link it a little bit, link this sort of fairly socio-technical literature to more social science framing of what goes on, partly drawing on what's called a multi-level perspective, but it's a bit independent of the exact terminology, the exact concept. The fact is, you have technologies which will experiment, which will have niches, some will be unsuccessful, but sooner or later technologies will break through, and that is the blue on the right, obviously. And initially, one may hardly even notice the impact on established technologies, which still dominate. But as the new technologies grow, they will increasingly challenge the existing incumbents and the existing structures, which can be characterized as a socio-technical regime governing the way that we used to organize the systems. So many start small, may take years for emergence, followed by periods of market emergence. The initial impact may be limited, but over time, you may enter this reconfiguration level, whereby there's a huge impact as emerging technologies start to force change or require change if they're to grow to full potential of the existing structures we have. So you'll notice that what I've done in this chart really is take the conversation beyond just innovation or even, the S-curve dynamics into the structural dimensions of major transitions. And then a final remark on this in the context of policy, and this is another chart from the IPCC, partly interacting with ongoing research I've been involved in, around this idea of three different policy pillars, or realms of economic decision making. This just underlines that in all cases you do want a mix of policies. Strategic investment, which typifies what I've been saying about technology investment, technology push, etc., and very targeted supports for emergence. You want to move into a realm where one has a stronger role for broader based markets and less technology targeted markets as a technology grows. But in some technologies, maybe many, there could be a very important role around norms and behavior. And if we just look, for example, at either clean transport technologies or things like heat pumps, actually the social dimension of those is really quite important to the degree of acceptance and encouragement and adoption by wider society. And that may become important if you really want the technologies to start moving towards the theoretical potential. So what we have is strategic investment, similar story, but now in policy terms. Strategic investment for the emerging technologies and businesses, the leading businesses. You want to evolve or reconfigure the infrastructure and the market structures you have to really get the scale and the supply chain developments to accelerate the global diffusion. And you want to expand with attention to the standards required, the norms, the behavior, and also addressing then some of these technologies may well be laggards who are kind of stuck for various reasons with the older technologies. Okay, I'm taking most of my time. I think many of this audience may know the story about the UK electricity transition. It's quite an interesting one when viewed through this lens of technology building and then structural change. But I will just say a quick reminder for some of you, the UK has radically reduced its emissions. It's halved its emissions from power sector. It's effectively phased out coal apart from a tiny sliver left for winter use.
Michael, can you finish within 1 minute?
Yeah, so I'll skip the UK story because it involved those transitions. I will also actually skip some mathematical representation. I put a slide in for those who want to study a paper. It basically says if you're in this kind of regime, it is worth investing a lot more upfront than in a classic integrated assessment model. So just for those interested in the modeling side of this, the global optimal modeling, this fundamentally changes your picture of what is the optimal global policy, quite aside from debates around climate damages. What I did want to say in winding up is that we are now in a world in this transition economics and dynamics, not where you're focused upon the classical economic reasoning around marginal change and the kind of concepts and tools, but rather the aim and the expectation is non-marginal change, it's deeper structural change and transition. And that has all kinds of implications for the purpose of your intervention, the rationale, how you analyze it, the kinds of models you require, and even the theoretical basis of what you're trying to do. And again, this is a table out of our East reports.
Okay,
so
Michael.
my final remark is just to one step further, published 2 months ago at the Clean Energy Ministerial. We went on from that research to publish a report on 10 principles for policymaking in energy transition. And they're not in the presentation and you wouldn't have time to cover those, but I would refer you across to that report if you're interested in the more specific policy recommendations emerging from this international research program. And on that, many of you may have seen that one before. I will finish. That was the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. It was very interesting. And now the participants can pose some questions on the Q&A space. And then Michael will respond to some of them. We do not have too much time left, but we have 6 minutes. So any questions here? I will start with one question, because in Denmark, we think we are leading in energy, wind energy and energy islands, as you know. And now our government and all the investors are willing to invest billions of euros into energy islands combined with power to X. And it's accelerating extremely fast. And it's very much initiated by Danish industry who have a interest in that, and also our investors who have too much money and they need a good place to spend the money. So how would you explain that in your framework?
Well, I think one of the really exciting dimensions of this is once you unleash these kind of transitions, and Kirsten, you're quite right, the wind energy story really started in Denmark. And I also try and remind my students who think that Ørsted is a wonderful clean energy company, unlike these dirty Shell or BP. It started life as a Danish national oil and gas company. And because of the thrust, it's moved to become a fully renewables company. And as you say, what has emerged is something we could have never fully anticipated, which is realizing on our doorstep, we have a huge energy resource in the North Sea. We know how to design and build those things. And that then opens up another set of questions. If we have that volume of clean energy, there are other things we can do with it, like the power to X that you referred to, with an integrated North Sea system. And so once you unleash these transition processes, you never know how far they may take you. They may open up whole new terrain, which is, I think, what you're referring to. No, it's a really interesting and exciting story, and I agree, fast moving.
Just take Maersk, the Danish container shipping, maybe the largest in the world. They have promised to be CO2 neutral already in 2040, and I think this is because they think they can compete globally if they can make sure to like supermarkets and other, that all their commodities are transported without any greenhouse gas emission. Yep,
you're quite right.
Okay,
and
there's a question on the Q&A also. Anonymous saying, stimulating presentation, how geopolitics drive current trends in green innovation and structural changes. What about the place of Europe in this economic competition race with US and China?
A modest little question.
Yes.
So it's hard to start these processes with global cooperation. They start in individual geographies, but in all our case studies, we found internationalization was an important part of the process. I do think the question points to a challenge, which is there seems to be more direct competition between particularly those three regions. Let's not forget the scale, though, also of the Indian market that's growing rapidly, and some emerging major powers in Africa and Latin America. There's no simple answer. I think what is striking is with the US Inflation Reduction Act, we do see more of a push towards subsidy-driven rather than price-driven, and I think there will be some limits to that. With the US announcement this week on steel tariffs, it looks like a pretty aggressive trade-related measure vis-a-vis Chinese steel, and that is probably not how we want to see climate policy developing, in my personal view, though I haven't had a chance to look at details. I mean, we are entering a world where I think the level of, the ease of internationalization is reduced, but we have to find ways through that. We're not going to solve these problems just through, three major regions just trying to outcompete each other and trying to shut down the borders. Okay, so we got another question from K Team who would like to make a comment. I don't know who K Team is, but I think we can invite them to make a comment now. So, yes, okay. But let us try then to invite for a last question. You can just from someone in the audience. So anybody who want to have a comment to Michael now? No.
But
yeah.
But simply to insist on the question of the international cooperation. There is no answer, but likely this will be on the top. This should be on the top of our agenda in the following years, given what happens between Russia, Ukraine, and us, and China, and the US. Because, for example, in France, we have a lot of flashback of people who argue that the French system has been weakened by the mistakes due to the Greens, and the Green Party has made a lot of mistakes in the past. And one of the arguments against the renewable energy, wind energy, and solar is that all these will be imported from China. The batteries in car industry and so on and so forth. So we have the flashback of an argument saying that, well, we are dependent upon China and other countries, and that's since we want to defend our independence, then we have to stop that. So that's to reinforce the point of the international cooperation and the argument in favor of international cooperation. We have already to reinforce it in the forthcoming years. That's simply a note, and that's really important.
Yeah,
it's a good point, and I will also add to that I think that a major reason why Danish big companies are very eager on getting started on the very advanced technologies is that they think they can compete with China about that, because they think that with high salary costs and other costs in Europe, we need to be more sophisticated, and therefore they want high green standards. So Danish and European companies can compete with China that cannot easily live up to so high standards.
Could I just add one other comment as well?
Yes.
Which is, I think many of us work with public policy and governments, and the level of tension between governments is troubling. But when we talk about one region out-competing another, it's worth remembering that most companies don't think like that. Most important companies are international. They will have subsidiaries or operations in the different countries, and they will want to see less international friction. They will want to host their manufacturing where it's most cost effective to do so. And whilst I understand the narrative about the jobs and manufacturing going abroad, I mean, I spoke to some German companies about the solar issue, and they said, well, yeah, we'd hope to be more dominant, but the fact is we are still largely helping to build some of the factories in China that make PV, and there are still benefits, obviously, to German and consumers across Europe and globally from bringing those costs down. So I think that we shouldn't let ourselves get too trapped into that geopolitical rivalry, because major forces in this are corporate and they do not want to see.
I think that was a good point for conclusion, and it has actually been a very interesting session this morning. So I would like to thank Michael and all of you that participated in this session. And yeah, it's nice to get some new ideas. This is what we need. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I really look forward to this session. And I'm very happy that the organizers have decided on a very pertinent question, because we know all the reports are saying that we are far off from what is required for decarbonization from all the sectors. And the two most important sectors which have been identified as the hard to abate sectors, one is industry and the other one is transport. So let's see what the experts give us hope about how the industry sector can decarbonize and what are the challenges and what are the way forward. We have with us today the two panelists. So one is Stefan and the other speaker is Mercedes. And then we have the panelists, three panelists. One is Akilisha, Jean-Charles, and Hilton. And so I hope that the presenters will present their text first, and then we will have I'll invite the panelists to comment and express their views on that. And then we can go back to the panelists again, and then we can summarize. So without wasting any time, I would invite Stefan to make your presentation, please.
Yes, thank you, Jayashri. I try to present. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it, but it's not in
Also
presentation mode. You can do it view slide, and
Mhm.
so that we can, but this is also visible. Yes, good. Thank
Is this
you.
the presentation mode?
Yes, yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm not seeing anything else now. So please remind me if the time is over. And many
Sure.
thanks also from my side to be here today to talk on the transition to non-fossil energy intensive industries and exactly as you pointed it out, how to trigger and make these transitions faster. And so after a quick introduction, which is not new for most of you here, I would try to go to the global steel transformation as one example and come to a conclusion on what could we do politically to make steel industry, for example, from a hard to abate to a quick to abate sector. And so let's start with the introduction. You all know this chart from the IPCC. So industry is very relevant. Emissions have gone up and particularly the basic materials like steel is the most important on the bottom, have been even increasing in the share of industrial emissions in the past. And we are expecting that to further grow because simply we need still need these materials. And we are not only in a hurry because climate neutrality and the climate cannot wait, but also because these heavy industries have very long investment cycles. This is a picture from Europe, but it's pretty similar also globally. So we see if we build new steel works based on fossil fuels, in that case on coal and coke, these technology will have to operate or will last 50 years, will have to operate commercially for decades. And so will be in operation long after we want to have achieved climate neutrality. And that also is true for petrochemicals, for cement industry and for others. And so we see that it's really important to be quick to move to non-fossil climate neutral technologies in these industries. And on the right side, you can see on top of that, what even makes the transition or the challenge bigger is that we have huge reinvestment needs in these industries like steel, chemicals, and cement. Again, European numbers where we think that by 2030, we need at least some 50% of these technologies to be reinvested. And these technologies that we reinvest should be climate compatible, so be at least potentially used with non-fossil energies. And that's really a big challenge. And I'm trying to go into some more depth on that on the steel sector. You probably know all these map. So that's where steel is produced. Most of it is in the conventional blast furnace technology, the black dots, but there's also the secondary steel in the gray dots, a lot of that in the US. And the blue dots is the natural gas based route, mainly in the Middle East and Northern Africa. So that's where we are currently. If we look again on the age of the assets, we can see that the share of the global blast furnace fleet, at least from theoretical analysis, that needs reinvestment is some 70% over the rest of this decade, which is really, really huge. And you can see also where that is, of course, most of it in China, but also other Asian countries. But Europe in the slide before is also significant. So that's really a big challenge, how to do this investment in a way that we don't create big carbon lock-in, but rather a window of opportunity. And probably everybody also here knows that's not only over a gigaton of steel making capacity. That's also linked to roughly 2 gigatons of potential CO2 emissions. And on top of this reinvestment challenge, there's also that countries like India and other Asian countries are strongly growing and are in the need of new capacities. Estimated are 180 megatons of steel making. And again, these capacities, if really invested in brand new steel mills, should not be in technologies that will then later make it impossible to achieve our climate neutrality goals. There is luckily already a stream of announcement of going for green steel. So that means investing in the direct reduction route, which can be converted to hydrogen based. So some 60 to 80 megatons are to date announced to become online and be operational quite before the end of this decade. However, if you look on the left figure compared to a gigaton or more of needs of investment, that's still way too small. So we have to significantly speed that up. So what could these strategies, and again, maybe let's have a look on this gap. You can see on the left side the so-called advanced economies, on the right side China, and you see there is already some green steel investments in Europe and other advanced economies here, some 30 megatons. To date is even a little bit more. We could have more secondary steel if we take better care of circularity in the sector. However, steel is already very much circularity. And there's a potential of shutdown of overcapacity. But compared to the reinvestment need, there's still a big gap. And if we go to China, it's even bigger. And also these increases of secondary steel and potential shutdown, 150 megatons, that's really significant, is of course no easy strategy at all. However, what could we do? In principle, is we could invest in these 130 megatons of new DRI steel in the advanced economies and stepwise switch them to hydrogen. For China, that might also be combined with importing DRI, either from hubs in Western China and Northern China, or imports of green DRI. But that's a big challenge. If you add the numbers together, you are already at 550 megatons of steel capacity to be invested by the end of this decade. So that's really a lot, and is in the dimension of what China did when they expanded their steel production in the beginning of this century. So that's really a lot. And the question is, how can we achieve that? That's one point we can see in the future value chains. And here you can see first the current value chain of steel making. So we have typically to date ore exporters and coal exporters. I named some: Australia, Brazil, South Africa, and others. And they are shipping coal and ore to the primary steel makers like China, Europe, Korea, Japan. Of course, China has most of its coal themselves. That's the current way we are doing this primary steel making value chain. But in the future, that could change to another value chain. We could import still the ore, because ore sites have not changed. But we also then, if we want to make it with green hydrogen, we need to come to the green hydrogen. And so there could be hydrogen exporters. That could be, of course, Northern Europe. In the case of Europe, could be overseas. However, shipping hydrogen is extremely expensive. There is just one small ship commuting between Australia and Japan. I'm not sure how many trips it has already made, but that's more a demo or experimental project than something commercial. So that's really the question, if this future value chain will become attractive and really working on the market. However, there is another option of this value chain. We could have combined the ore and the renewable energy sources. For example, in countries like Brazil, Australia, South Africa, Sweden, as another example, is currently really already implementing this route. And then, for example, export the direct reduced iron via ship, which is much more easy than shipping the hydrogen, and do the low carbon steel then based on this green iron. And this strategy, for example, has been announced in large scale by Korean POSCO, who announced that they want to invest $40 billion by 2040 in Australia to develop such a value chain. So such a value chain of enhanced green iron trade could have the potential to boost the transition to global green steel, because in the end it's much cheaper than shipping the hydrogen, and we could tap with the steel making into the most cost efficient sweet spots for renewable energies, and that could also be a growth strategies for countries of the global south if they are to be those green iron exporters. However, not necessarily. There are also potentials, for example, in the US to become such a green iron exporter. Let me come to the end, how to enable such a global steel transformation. And as you all know, steel has already emerged on the global agenda. This is some screenshots from the COP26 Glasgow steel breakthrough. So there's already lots of political action around that. Here we made a map of all these emissions and activities. I skip that briefly and would like to conclude with a proposal that we have published from Wuppertal Institute with some of you also as co-authors to implement a sectoral steel climate club as an instrument to enable that, which would have goals like complete climate neutrality of the primary steel production by 2050 or even earlier, which would have a moratorium on reinvestment in conventional unabated technology as early as possible. And such a club should have different properties. I think that's pretty much close to what Michael already presented. And I want to focus on the middle, so on the infrastructure thing, because I think on innovation, for example, for steel, there's already lots of things ongoing international, and also on markets. Currently, there are initiatives with the IEA and others to create labels for green steel, to create lead markets, ED initiative. But what we are still lacking, and what such a club might enable or facilitate, is to go for the infrastructure challenge. So really to come to a coordinated development of infrastructures for hydrogen, for renewable energies, and also for the transport of either green primary iron or others. And I think for such a transition of these industries, which need heavy energy infrastructure, it's not only investing in new technology for steel making, its national sectoral transition plans are needed, and to make that in a coordinated international initiative could be an interesting solution. And of course, the membership of such a club should be open in a transparent accession process. So that's one of the options. We might be able to really make a step forward with green steel making, and if we are able to harness the potentials of this green iron trade, that we might be able to make steel from hard to abate to maybe quick to abate. Thanks a lot. And I think my time is also over.
Yeah, thank you very much for being on time and It's an extremely interesting presentation. And I hear just two things which I want to take away from here is that, so there was long back discussion on can we implement the sectoral approach in managing the emission, but then that got lost in the middle of the way. And now it's the same approach, whether it is club or sector we are talking about. But yes, we need to overcome hurdles, and we can come up with these discussions at the end from the panelists also. And I do see a possibility, but also how the competitiveness will be addressed in the whole process of such arrangement that also needs to be looked into. Thank you very much. And may I request now Mercedes to make a presentation.
Yes, thank you. I hope you can hear me now. So I'm just gonna try to share my screen. Perfect.
Yes,
so I believe this is working now, and you can see the screen.
Yeah, but can you just make it a slideshow mode so that we can see the whole slide? It's still not in the slideshow mode.
It's not in the slide mode. I think it's because I have two screens and I need to swap them. Is that in the...
Not yet in the slideshow mode, but then still it works. I would not say it is not working. If you're finding it otherwise difficult, it's okay. We can live with this.
So the way you see it, so let me see if I just swap the screens again. Is that any better?
No, it's the same.
Okay. I don't know why it's not doing it. Can you see it okay though?
Yeah. We can see it, so you can continue.
Okay, so I don't know exactly what happens. I think it's because I have two screens and it's not picking up the right screen for some reason. Let's try this. Is it better now?
No change we can see.
Okay, I don't know. Okay, let's get going. If you see it, okay, that's fine. I think you may not see the same I see, but you more or less see my screen, my slides. So that's the main
only thing is that just the bottom part is getting cut. Otherwise, it's okay. I think you can continue and let's see if we find
perfect. So let's do that. So I'm gonna compliment what Stefan said. He took a sector approach. And the presentation I'm going to give you is actually around industrial cluster. So it's a cross-sectorial. So it's based on energy-intensive industries that tend to share infrastructure and geographical locations. And that's the approach with IDRIC. We are based in the UK, and we are working on helping the industrial clusters to decarbonize. So it's a cross-sectorial approach. And in terms of what's happening, I think this has already been mentioned before, but we have sectors that are very difficult to decarbonize, particularly energy intensive and also transport. And this is really the area where we focus around trying to accelerate the pace and scale to decarbonize industrial sectors. And you can see on the left-hand side is a decoupling of emissions from economic growth. But we know as well that that has mainly happened.
Your slides are not changing. We are still on the first slide, our title slide.
Okay, I have no idea why, because they are changing on my screen.
Okay,
because we are not.
We are not seeing the slideshow mode. That's why this is happening. So from the left side, if you go one by one, that might work, because your slides are not changing on our screen. have we lost Mercedes? She's there.
Okay, so I'm trying again.
Sure.
I have disconnected the screen. I think it was getting some problems for us. So hopefully you can see me, and I'm just going to share the screen. I'm working now on one monitor, so. Hopefully it's working now. Apologies for all this.
We can see, yes.
Okay.
This is
Perfect. So it must have been some issues with the two monitors for some reason.
It's
anyway,
working.
So let's get things going, because I know I'm just taking up too much time. The focus, as I said at the beginning, is in cross-sectorial and focus on clusters that share infrastructure. And we heard already that this is a quite difficult sector to decarbonize, but the approach that we are taking in the UK is by getting as the first step towards decarbonizing industry to actually decarbonize clusters. And you can see a map in the middle there. These are the clusters that we work with. So they are all the way from Scotland, and a number of them in England, Wales, and the northwest of England as well. And if you see that there are different colors in there, actually those different colors indicate different sectors. So you can see we cover from cement, chemicals, food, iron, non-metallic, other industries, paper and refining. And the interesting point to note is that these clusters are quite different. So if I pick, for instance, the sector in Teesside is dominated by chemicals, but if you pick a sector like in Grangemouth, actually has non-metallic minerals involved in there. Or if you go to the Merseyside area, there is a number of different industries. So by working with these clusters, we really are looking at decarbonizing a number of different sectors. The numbers that you have on the left-hand side is in terms of what these clusters represent, or industry for the UK, 9% of the UK GDP, jobs and emissions associated with that. And the right-hand side of the slide, this is the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, funded partly by the UK government, but also much funded with private investment. And this is a mission-driven, so we are aiming to have 4 low-carbon clusters within the 2030s, and then the first net zero cluster that will be in the 2040s. And what this means is that there is a range of projects, as you can see in that slide there, projects that go all the way from capture to projects that do offshore, onshore, CO2, hydrogen, and also infrastructure projects. So the whole industrial decarbonization challenge has 3 areas. It has an area where these different clusters do plans, roadmaps. It has an area for deployment projects, that you have them in the map there. And then a third strand is IDRIC, the Industrial Decarbonization Research and Innovation Center. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on, the research and innovation part of this much larger program. And the picture that you have on the right-hand side, on the top, the Industrial Decarbonization Strategy, that's actually the first strategy that has been published worldwide to decarbonize industry. And this was published in the UK in March last year, 2021. Okay, so in terms of the IDRIC, and this is what I want to focus on for the rest of my presentation, the next few slides, our focus, as I said, is on research and innovation. So making sure that we develop solutions and we accelerate how they come to market. But associated with that as well, there is an element of skills that are very important. We need to make sure that the skills are transitioned as we transition clusters as well. And also something that we are very keen and therefore we are very happy and pleased to invite us to the meeting today is on knowledge exchange and how we can actually internationally we can learn from each other to help decarbonize industry. There are two main tools that we work with. One of them is the role of innovation. You can see on the left-hand side that 50% of the global emissions do not have at this point technologies that have been fully mature. And also on the right-hand side, what you can see is that without collaboration and cooperation on a global scale, we will be delayed by at least 40 years in terms of reaching targets. So building on that collaboration, what we are focusing on IDRIC is collaboration at a scale and pace. We have 142 partners, more than half, they're actually industrial partners. And there is also a range of organizations, associations, and policymakers. And I'm not going to have time to build on this today, but we have a very active program to engage policymakers and provide evidence, because sometimes it's not just the technology alone, it's really the business models, the policy, the regulatory framework. And all that has to be brought in together into what we call a whole systems approach. Last year, and beginning of this year, we launched 43 projects. And those 43 projects cover a range of technologies, a range of issues and challenges around scalability, policy, skills, environmental considerations, and social and economic. And it's all these that actually the richness of these projects and aligning these projects with industry to make sure that we accelerate impact coming out from the outputs of the projects. And I mentioned just impact, and this is really what we are keen in terms of how we conduct this cluster activity is what we call this real world impact. So we have brought together the ecosystem from a public, industry, third sector, government, academia, and it's how we can ensure that the outputs of our program, they go beyond scientific publications that are important, but also making sure that they do have an impact, social and economic, on the clusters. And I've been focusing very much on the UK, from a UK perspective, the industrial clusters. I should have said as well that the UK clusters in the UK, they contribute to over 50% of the industrial emissions. So that's why the focus to start with is on clusters. But the ambition is to decarbonize dispersed sites and industries outside clusters as well. And I'm taking a little bit and step out a little bit in terms of a global scale and a global landscape here. And I'm really pleased to be on the UN Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition. We did a series of statements in COP27. But what I want to highlight to this group is that one of the working groups that we have identified as part of this Council of Engineers is actually industrial decarbonization or decarbonization of energy-intensive industry. And I'm co-chairing that group. So if you are interested in learning more about the activities more on a global scale, please contact me. So 3 key methods to wrap up. And this is around where net zero and industrial decarbonization. It is critical, as we know, it's challenging, but I think I also want to finish with an optimistic message that it is possible. But to make it possible, the decade of the 2020s is really key. So we actually have this clean energy, this transition that we need to happen. And finally, my third message is around the opportunities and the social and economic growth. A study that we published a couple of weeks ago in London, we estimate that through this transition of industrial clusters that I highlighted to you today, we could create an additional new 400,000 jobs within the next decade. And that's all I want to share today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present. Apologies for the issues that we have with the slides. But I hope I have conveyed the message of the criticality of decarbonized industrial clusters and the need to do this together, not just within a nation and a country, but really on a global context. So thank you so much, and I'm going to stop sharing now.
Oh, thank you so much. This was so useful, because this reminds me, you know, in 1980s and 90s in India, for managing the local water pollution from the industries. They started these industrial clusters, and they were trying to build the central ETPs, CETPs, right? So centrally effluent treatment plants. So this was the same concept, which it is reminding me, right? So it's not that the countries do not know. So they have experience of industrial clusters, and in many places they have, but I'm just thinking that at that time, it was more water pollution management through which the clusters were built. And now the clusters will going to be a little bit different. So I think starting the dialogue from now in different countries would be extremely useful through the industrial associations and the academic institutions. Thank you very much. We will come back to you later. Yeah, and now I have a very illustrious panelists also with me. So I'm really happy that I'm chairing this session because I'm learning a lot too. So can I ask Akihisha from IGES to give your reflections on these presentations and your new insights also?
Thank you very much for your kind of introduction. So I'd like to share my experiences within 3 slides and 5 minutes, as you can see here. So hello, my name is Akisa Kirama, researcher of IGES. So can you see these slides now?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So now IGES has been working for creating roadmaps or visions towards net zero societies. So with companies and the local governments. So then today I'd like to share some views for industry sectors, including heavy industries. So actually, developing scenario has a really challenging for our activity as well. This one reason is that it is actually challenging to setting industrial structures in 2050s. So this slide shows the result of model analysis by Japan Center for Economic Research. So they are analyzing how DX digital transformations would impact on industrial structures in Japan. So DX has many impact on not many sectors, such as transport sectors, sharing, mobility could be expanded. As a result, number of vehicles is less than current numbers. Therefore, it directly affects on the volume of iron and steel. So therefore, this figure shows the comparisons between production volume between 2050 and 2015. If you can see iron and steel, the volume is at least more than 50% to the DX. Other hand, information technology sectors, the production's volumes is higher regarding the chemical, so it slightly decreased, but anyhow keeping our current levels. So in addition, when we think about 2050, it's probably that we have to be consider about circular economy impact from circular economies as well as decarbonizing trend. So probably we may think about another pictures as well. Next difficulty is allocations of industrial structures. Of course, if the structure changes, probably factory locations of factory could be changes a lot. So when the left-hand side, this is a result of questionnaire surveys for companies. So the criteria for selecting site for factories. So traditionally, the companies are selecting the location factories where infrastructures and network are available, and also they finding lower land prices. Currently, they is to find good human resources is increasing both populations Japan is decreasing, so it's getting to be difficult to find good human resources. And also through the work dialogue with stakeholders, many companies pointed out that in future they will prioritize access to cheap and decarbonized energy such as offshore and wind energy. So many uncertainties about locations. In terms of the perspectives on local government, so the industry sector has a key element because of jobs. So jobs create the jobs directly impacts on the number of residents. Also jobs and companies create pays corporation tax for municipalities. Therefore, municipalities very concerned about how to sustain industrial clusters, current industrial clusters within their regions. At the same time, local government have to consider other social welfare issues such as transportation for elderly people, as well as effective use of emptying house as well as abandoned farmlands. So those issues need to be considered at the same time. So therefore, kind of really complex issues. You have to consider about those issues with stakeholders such as local government and the companies. So in particular, we consider about sub-regions, so stakeholder dialogue could be key points to create feasible and tangible, feasible scenarios. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
This is really complementary to the other presentations also, that if we are going to make the transformation, then there are going to be a lot of political and the social implication and in the local context. And so along with innovation, how do you really manage these? Which actually Marcerise also mentioned in her effort, that how they are looking into these also. But I think what is really, really important is how every country gets prepared for that and whether that is really happening. Otherwise, there will be a lot of social conflict, unrest, and which might create the barrier for the transformation. So these dialogues really need to start at a much faster rate than at the pace which is happening now. Thank you very much, and we will come back to you again. And what I would request now, Jean-Charles, do I see Jean-Charles here?
I'm here.
Yes. Oh, wow. Okay. Can you?
My computer is not very good in terms of, but I will share my screen. My talk will be complementary, but hold on. I made a mistake here. Okay, fine. You see that? Okay. You see it? No problem.
Yes, we can see, but not in the slideshow mode, though.
That's
yes,
okay.
It's perfect now.
My presentation will be short. You give me 5 minutes. Is more centered on the business context that we have and that we face, because I'm totally struck by the implications of the geopolitical context, which is really, really important, because as engineers, we can define scenarios, trajectories, but then you have what happens, how to trigger that. And the triggering relies on the building a cycle of trust, and we are in a deep context of distrust in the world. I will not comment a lot there. This is simply a compilation of extracts of the executive summary, the chapter 15 of the IPCC report on finance. The question ultimately is that we have, I would say, to redirect more or less 15% of the capital gains, of the revenues of the 15.6 billion of billionaires in the world, and to redirect them in the low carbon investments, and most of them developing countries. And here lies the geopolitical problem. We have really a problem of the cooperation with the global south, and that makes a problem. And then on this, simply we have simple lines. We say, well, it's not due for you, but we have a problem of parallel investment in mitigation, the coordination throughout the value chain. We have the problem of the upfront risk, and we need a greater use of public guarantees. Cannot rely only on subsidies. We have subsidized to enhance the local markets. Somebody has said that, and we need no business model to aggregate small scale financing needs in a lot of sectors, not only the big sectors. And we insist that's a matter of credibility. Any device should be based on transparent and scientifically based project assessment methods, because we have really a problem of distrust, and we want to build confidence. We have to have something in common in the way in which we assess things. And that's the macroeconomic story. We have to think about the interlinkages between what we say and what happens in international competition, the financial constraints, so on and so forth. All this is in the report. I start with that simply to remind that. Okay, we are ready to embark in that in our reasoning, including the macroeconomic story. So 4 remarks, and I stop here. It's very general ones. We see what happens in international cooperation. We have a temptation of, I would say, our countries to think in terms of country per country approach, negotiation with South Africa, G20 with Indonesia, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of merits in that, but this will not create the circle of trust we need at short notice. So my second remark is that then we need something like multilateral initiatives, including in the current context, which is complicated politically, but we need to launch a circle of trust, and we published a lot of things on that. I will simply quote that at the end, but we know the story that we have to have multilateral sovereign-based guarantee funds. We have to have to agree on common rules to assess the projects with third-party selections, because there's a long tradition of in the development economics of the price to be paid by the suspicion about the pure bilateral, the bilateral cooperation, which embarks a lot of political bargaining on that, and we have to try to minimize that. And we have also on that basis to pay attention to create to attract more to reduce the fragmentation of climate finance, which is huge, and to articulate better what happens with the role of the development banks, who actually invest more on mitigation and don't invest enough in adaptation. And if we count in private finance to generate to fund low carbon investment, then we can devote more funds for adaptation. So I stop here simply so that we need these type of things. Otherwise, the purely per country the approach might not scale up investment at the level we need, because of the fact that the financial system will not follow. So I stop here because I've only 5 minutes. I would simply have a sentence to say that in literature, we have to pay attention that funding adaptation is something very different from funding mitigation. Because mitigation, more or less, we sell, you sell something. There are marketable goods and services, and if you cut the level of risk on the investment, then capital will flow there. Adaptation is simply something which is related to non-marketable goods and services, and that's something else. Here you need subsidies. You need really public funds in a context in which all governments look at their budget and they have to be faced with a lot of competing demands on health, education, safety, and so on and so forth. And then we are ready to. Then I come back to that. That we are ready to embark the private capital and the global savings to fund mitigation, and then to look at carefully what happens in adaptation, because adaptation, we have a problem. Adaptation is not something you cannot say. This investment is purely adaptation. Any investment to reduce the investment, to reduce the infrastructure investment gap in the world, 30%, more or less, on water, on health, and so on and so forth, contributes to adaptation. It's very difficult to isolate what is adaptation per se and what is simply the reduction of the investment on basic needs and health, and so on and so forth. And then we have absolutely the reaction of the Treasury in the North will say, "Oh, we could."
Thank you, Jean-Charles. We will come back to you.
This was my last sentence, so that's fine. It's my last remark, because nobody talked about that, and that's it. That's simply to make the separation, adaptation, and mitigation. Sorry.
Thank you. We will come back if we have time, because we are running out of time. Yeah. Can I now request? Can you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah.
And can I now request Hilton to come back, please?
Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes. Very well.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for the invitation to participate at this meeting. Have I got 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
5 minutes, please.
5 minutes, okay. I won't present any slides. I'll just present some very simple ideas. I'll tell you what it looks like from a South African and an African perspective when you ask the question, what does global decarbonisation of industry, and very specifically the steel sector, mean? So what do we start with? We start with the global sector that produces 1,800 megatons of steel. Africa produces 20 megatons of steel. That's 1% of that. Africa has 17% of the world population. And by 2050, we'll expect to have 25%, and by 2100, 40% of the world population. The African steel production is in 5 countries out of 54 countries. And the so-called steel in-use stock, the amount of steel currently in our machinery and infrastructure in Africa, is about between 0.5 and 1 ton per person, compared with about 10 tons in Europe, 15 tons in other jurisdictions. As a result, Africa can't provide very basic infrastructure to most of its population. The good news for global steel decarbonisation is recent developments in technology, I don't have to tell you this, mean that it's technologically feasible and possible and economically possible. The bad news is that unless there are significant institutional innovations in global value chains, we can expect a replication of what's happened in the past 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in Africa, whereby the very competitive world steel industries, and when I say very competitive, I mean very large industries, basically dumping steel on world markets, especially small countries like South Africa, means that Africa can't develop a steel sector, which means that if we don't have the substantial transformation, not in technology, and I'll make one comment on that, South Africa spends about 1.5% of its GDP on total research and development. The average expenditure in the industrialized countries is 2%. But the thing is, the average GDP per capita in the industrialized countries is 10 times at least South Africa's and 20 to 30 times those of most other African countries. So we won't be developing the technology to compete with you in Africa. We will be, one, technology takers, and two, we will also be market takers. The reality of world supply chains is that if we are lucky in Africa, we export iron ore to you and you send steel back to us. Just about every country. South Africa produces about as much as it consumes, but we are a complete outlier. But if you, and then just one last, that was about Africa and Africa. So what is needed, and Michael's presentation was brilliant because he focused on technology innovation, but then he moved on to the crucial issues of what defines transformation. And I think that we all of us in this meeting that have been following what the transformation needed as described in IPCC reports and many other powerful research, says that transformation will require systemic transformation, which I think is one of this group's commitments. And systemic transformation doesn't just require changing a transformation from one technology to another, using DRI steel iron production versus blast furnaces or PV versus coal. It involves a lot more. And so that's what the research that we've been doing at the University of Cape Town and IDRI. We've looked deeply into the systemic transformations needed, and two will be needed at base point. One, for us to start participating in global steel value chains, we would need areas, and I'm just picking on Europe because I think, in many cases, very progressive. Europe says that they are committed to open, fair international trade in things like iron and steel. If you offer that to us, we would be able to compete in your markets. We could export, because we have iron and very cheap renewable energy, we could export to you. So we'd need that. And that would allow us to participate at one level, the first step of transforming our industry. Other African countries largely couldn't. Some North African countries could. But we need much more than that, because essentially to up the level of steel in-use stocks from about 0.5 tons per capita to around 5 tons per capita, which is a minimum for basic services provision, we'd need to make a lot of steel. And importing the steel from the rest of you, from non-African countries, would just lead to the same situation that we have now. So a true commitment to global decarbonisation and transformation would require innovative institutional arrangements to facilitate that. And I can't tell you all of those in 5 minutes, but I think I've made my main points. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for, I think, the sequence of the speakers had been, by chance, the best, because we could not have had this as the summing up, which you have done in a very short time. But what I want to say is that basically, it's interesting. It's only 4 minutes we are left with, but what I would do, half a minute I'll give to all of you, but I will take just 1 minute to say that it is important that we need whatever you all have said, but if you want to see all these elements as a system of change, what we really need, then basically it's a kind of, when we say that in Paris that no one should be left behind, how do we really bring that up into the transformation need and all the changes that we are talking about, given the very different starting point for all the countries? So this is a big challenge, but I think we need to see how all the institutions can come together to meet this change. And that's not a very easy question. So I would say that this will be my take-home message from this, how everybody can come together to make it a quick change, which Stefan has started with a hope, and then how we saw everybody gave us many hopes that what can be done and way forward. So this is my take-home message. I would like to know your take-home message from today's discussion, or what message you want to live with the audience in half a minute, please, because I can't go beyond the time allocated to me. And remember, this is managed by the Japanese, right? So I need to be meticulous in managing my time too. Thank you. Stefan.
Thanks also from my side. So my take-home message is that we have to really be much more intensive into institutional arrangement, maybe such like the Steel Club I mentioned. You already pointed to the problems of that, but I think it's worthwhile to go much more into such concretions.
Thank you very much. Mercedes.
Thank you. So I think for me, I will highlight that we all need to benefit from the transition, the industrial transition to net zero. And I think there has to be, there will be different approaches, but I think it has to be an overall a benefit moving across to the net zero. And I think key for that is going to be collaboration. So I think I extended a hand in terms of, learning from other countries, other approaches, and the opportunity to collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I would come to our dear friend, Akihisha from IGES.
Thank you. I'd like to highlight good communications among stakeholders. So transformation have many uncertainties. So without kind of common consensus or communications, it's difficult to go momentum. So that's all. Thank you very much.
This is fantastic. Jean-Charles, half a minute.
Yeah, simply to say that's a bit upon what Hilton said and Stefan. The problem we have is that Europe, in the industrial, what happens for the steel industry just voted a tax against a border tax to protect our industries. And this can be solved only, I think, with approaches with clubs like Stefan mentioned and so on and so forth. But we have to pay attention to the geopolitics in this type of things. And that's something we have to take care of. So.
Hilton.
Very privileged. I'm off. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. It's a very, very privileged position to speak last with such a wonderful group. So, and I'll try not to, I'll try and be responsible with that. So, one way of looking at the problem we face is that we all start at different positions, and that is entirely correct, and I think we must describe that accurately. Another way, which is complementary, is that we all start with the same relationship that we have all built over history. And it's only, you can only change relationships if everybody changes the relationship. I can't decide to change a relationship with somebody just from my side, apart from walking away. If I want to stay in the relationship, then, so the word collaborate, the word club, these are ways of working on the relationship, and I'd like to see us working on that perspective of joint ownership a lot more. Thank you.
I love this ending statement. You brought a human touch to the hard steel discussion. Thank you very much, and I will not take any more minutes. And thank you, the organizers, for organizing such a wonderful panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. My name is Meenal Pathak. I'm based in Ahmedabad, India. And I'm a senior scientist with the Working Group 3 Technical Support Unit. And it's my great pleasure to be here on this very interesting panel. I believe the last session of the 13th annual meeting of the LCS RNet. So I'd just like to say a quick thank you to the LCS RNet leadership, especially Tomoko-san for all your support in organizing this session. And we have an interesting lineup ahead, but just to say a quick line on the importance of cities achieving the low carbon transition. It is now increasingly being recognized, and we highlight this in the latest report of the IPCC Working Group 3. The contribution of cities in emissions, which is also increasing, but at the same time, the growing number of solution options that we are seeing across the world, a large number of cities having announced net zero plans or starting to develop these plans. And we have an interesting panel today that where we'll go over these experiences for different cities across the world. And so I'd just like to very quickly go over the session outline. I will introduce each of the speakers who will speak for 5 minutes, highlighting the experiences from their work. And after this, we will have a discussion round where we'll focus on a couple of discussion sessions. And I hope, I hope it is interesting, and we have quite a few takeaways from this session. So let me start with Jan Webb. Welcome, Janet Webb. She is the Edinburgh University Professorial Fellow in Social Studies of Energy and UK Energy Research Centre co-director, and she's the member of the Ofgem Innovate UK Strategic Innovation Fund Expert Panel on Host Systems Integration and Scottish Science Advisory Council Energy Group. So Janet, over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to speak. I understand the Secretariat will share my slides. Thank you, that's great. So we'll go straight to the second slide, please. And what I'm going to talk about is the context in British cities and city regions in particular, looking, I hope, fitting in well with where we finished on the last session, which is talking very much about the kinds of institutional frameworks that we need in order to create the sort of ambition, put that ambition into action that we're seeing at many cities around the world. So I'm drawing on a range of research here, some of that from the UK Energy Research Council, some from other related research consortia. There is certainly no lack of ambition in British cities and city regions. What we've seen from just doing a basic count is that the majority of our around about 400 UK local authorities have declared climate emergencies, and the link on the bottom of that slide just allows you to see the range of those cities and different places across the UK. Most of those have plans that are aiming for absolute clean energy systems by particular dates, some sooner rather than later. I'm not sure at all how achievable those rapid transitions are, but nevertheless, the plans are there, often really looking at integrating at local and regional scale across heat, power, transport, storage, and energy saving, energy conservation, to gather the benefits, the synergies, if you like, between all of the resources, the energy and place-based resources that are available. We also see in the UK government's net zero strategy the recognition of just the breadth of influence that local authorities can have on carbon reduction. And that, just to give an indication visually there, the City Council of Bristol uses that diagram to convey a similar idea, just the breadth of scope of influence that our cities and city regions have over emissions and what can be done through the development of clean energy and better place-based planning to rapidly and accelerate the reduction of emissions. But what all of our research has shown, much as we've heard already, I think this morning in Britain, but is that will not happen without more local powers, more devolution of resources and powers to our local and city region authorities, and the kinds of technical capacities that are needed to enact the ambitious plans there. Next slide, please. I put this up just to give an indication of the benefits of pursuing that city region strategy, and that this is about more than carbon reduction. It's not, in other words, if you invest in cities, the argument from a lot of research now put together by Innovate UK there is that a place-based approach to climate mitigation, climate change mitigation, is far more beneficial all round. There are mutual co-benefits, in other words, in terms of reduced cost of investment, in terms of energy savings, particularly, which has been a very weak area in British energy policy in the last decade, but predominantly as well in terms of the wider social benefits from a place-based approach, as opposed to what we've called here a place-agnostic approach. So we're not only needing to invest less if we do this through coordinated approach across city regions, but also the social benefits in terms of jobs, better places to live, better environment, better biodiversity, better sense of well-being and welfare, public health. All of those improvements come from a more regional and city-based strategy. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of what can happen if we put some resources, this is again in the context of Britain, some specific technical resources to develop those skills in our cities that presently tend to be very concentrated in particular powerful industries and large-scale energy production in the UK. If we put some of that technical support into local authorities and cities, city governments, then what we see is that relatively small amounts of funding are multiplied, in this case 37 times. So for every €1 that came into British local authorities from the European Local Energy Assistance Funds, what we saw was that the ability to put all of that together into programs for the development of local energy systems, clean systems, delivering something like 37 times the investment, €859 worth of local low carbon investment, a very prudent use of public funds, I would argue. Next slide, please. So where are we now, though? The important question, perhaps we have the grand ambitions. Certainly we can see the value, not just financial value, but the whole societal, economic, environmental value nexus. I think it's fair to say that currently in British cities, enterprise and uncertainty is where we are broadly. Huge ambition, some very exciting projects. Someone was in contact with me yesterday, for example, from one of the London Borough Councils, talking about their £70 million investment in district heat network development as a council, leading that as a council, both through borrowing but also through partnerships across sectors. So in principle, we see that commitment to integrated action on local clean energy, bringing literally whole systems value to bear, but a lot of buts still in that picture. If you, as we have, interview people across sectors in Britain about the role of local and city region authorities, we get comments like this: well, local, citizen of nowhere really, isn't it? Who owns local? Who needs that local action? What scale is it? So there's lots of opportunities to tie yourself up in knots arguing about what scale is local, city, region, etc. And if we're going to devolve powers and resources to a greater extent to local areas, then how should that authority be shared? How should it be held accountable? So a lot of unanswered questions in the mix as well. And in practice, project sponsors would say they are, a quote from one of them there, awash with feasibility studies, but still struggling in the context of a British centralised energy market to translate those feasibility studies into programs on the ground. We have some uncertainties about the future of the gas grid, very well developed, particularly in Britain, England, Scotland and Wales. Question marks over whether we can get to a position where integrated local energy planning is a local power, a local statutory requirement, and requires that cross-sector collaboration that we've discussed already. Our future energy system scenarios, which are based on the UK Climate Change Committee's 6th carbon budget, I think still tend to see an all-electric future, but based on one consumer choice at a time. And really, given the changes we need to make, that is not going to do the trick. So we see that multi-dimensional value of locally integrated systems, locally integrated solutions to the climate challenge, still not translating into the case for users quickly enough to create the changes we want to see and the investment that's needed. Question I just will finish on, which is an interesting one perhaps to pick up later, is whether with the shift in thinking around heat regulation, we only have, as she says, electricity and gas market regulation in Britain at the moment. We don't regulate heat at all. Will those proposals for heat regulation, which are moving up the agenda, come to the fore? Will that support that action at city scale? Because heat network planning, decarbonisation of heat planning really needs to be done locally. Okay, and I think last slide next. Just to wrap up, so that's just a picture of the UKIRC, UK Energy Research Centre interactive themes. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Janet, for staying on time and for raising all these important issues, both around the governance and priority setting, but also the real problems around implementation. But I really like the optimistic tone. Sometimes talking about climate change makes it so depressing. We have to move quickly to the next set of presentations, and I think this is a dual act. So we have Marianne Gonzalez and Isabelle Deneau. Did I pronounce your name well? Who will present the French case studies. So very quickly, Marianne Gonzalez is a communication and international project manager for France Ville Durable, the French Association of Public and Private Professional Sustainable City Stakeholders. And Isabelle is the Development and Partnerships Director of Efficacity, the French Research and Development Center dedicated to urban energy transition. So over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your invitation. I'm very pleased to be taking part in this discussion with Isabelle, because Efficacity is a long-standing partner of France Ville Durable, and they have a lot of operational methodologies and tools to share on the topic of carbon neutrality. That's why I have asked Isabelle to take part with me in this discussion. I have a few slides if the Secretariat can share them on the screen. But basically, I wanted to share very briefly with you today 3 things. The importance of multi-stakeholder involvement in the field of carbon neutrality, and to say a quick word on the role of France Ville Durable as a unique multi-stakeholder network to accelerate the sustainable transformation of territories. And then I will also to move on the regional level and talk to you about the very interesting European dynamic taking place in the framework of the research and innovation program Horizon Europe, with the mission dedicated to 100 climate neutral and smart cities by 2030. And finally, I will conclude this very brief overview with a few words on the specific case of the urban community of Dunkirk as one of the 9 French laureates of this call for project. So on the screens, you have basically an overview of what France Ville Durable is. As introduced, it is the Association of Public and Private Sustainable Professional Stakeholders of the Sustainable and Resilient Cities. We are an association presided by Mr. Patrice Verguet, the mayor of Dunkirk and president of the urban community of Dunkirk. And our general delegate is Mr. Sébastien Maire, the former head of resilience and ecological transition for the city of Paris. As I said, so we are quite a unique network in France. as we allow a dialogue and synergies between many different stakeholders that you can see on the screen. On the one hand, the state and public operators with a strong presence of the Ministry of Ecological Transition, but also local authorities and associations of elected representatives, private experts and professional federation. Efficacity is part of this specific boards of experts, and also a strong involvement of private companies. And we believe having all these stakeholders around the same table is very key to accelerate the sustainable transformation of territories. So we bring together around 100 members today, and we act as a do tank to provide very operational support and capacity building through working groups, training and workshops. And we base all our activities on a logical frameworks resting on 4 pillars, which are sufficiency, resilience, inclusion, and creativity. I think this is this specificity. This is because of this specificity that we have been invited to take part in this discussion, as we are also in capacity to act as a bridge between research, innovation, and implementation on the ground, because we have all these stakeholders involved, and especially in the context of the EU mission 100 climate neutral and smart cities by 2030 that I have mentioned, and that you will see on the next slide. If you may go to the next slide, please. So basically, the goal of this overarching mission is to support, promote, and showcase 100 European cities in their systemic transformation towards climate neutrality by 2030. So we have 9 French cities which are laureates of this city's mission. And the idea is to benefit from support to build a multi-level co-creative process for identifying and agreeing on actions to be undertaken to accelerate and to achieve climate neutrality by 2030 through a climate city contract that will involve all relevant stakeholders at the scale of the city, but also the national representatives, and with the European Commission involved as well. So these contracts will be non-binding, obviously, but the idea is to state an ambition and to make sure that this ambition is shared by all the actors at the scale of a territory that are key to succeed. There is also a specific role of citizens in this mission as agents of change, and the importance of bottom-up initiatives and innovation and new forms of governance is also one of the key aspects of this European program. And all the cities that will take part in these initiatives will also benefit from support and facilitate access to financial means to achieve the mission goals through a wide range of already available EU instruments. And finally, the dynamic enables to foster a very systemic approach, combining new knowledge-based solutions, but also the use of standardized data that may enable scalable and smart technologies, new business models, regulatory approach, and integrated forms of governance and social innovation. So this is very an interesting and ambitious and challenging program. And if you may go to the next slides, please.
Yeah, may I just, very sorry to interject, but maybe you might have to wrap up. We're already 6 minutes
I'm
past.
wrapping up with just the slide of Dunkirk. And this mission is all the more interesting because it did not only target the champions of carbon neutrality, but also allows for a city like Dunkirk to take part in the mission. And Dunkirk is a very huge challenge because it is a huge industrial port platform amounting to 21% of national emission in France. And with the help of these very ambitious cities missions, it will accelerate its strategy for industrial decarbonation, involving all relevant stakeholders and with a very key part to play from industrial actors. And I will leave the floor to Isabel, which can add on this case of Dunkirk, because we have a lot of projects going on there. Thank you very much.
Yes. Hi all. Well, I have some slides as well, if you could put them up. So yes, Efficacity, as Marion said, is a member and an active partner of France Ville Durable. And it's an R&D institute, Research and Development Institute, which has been actually funded by the French government 8 years ago. Can you put up the presentation, please? So it brings together, actually, the institute is fully dedicated to their next slide, but can be actually seen. It's actually the previous one, please. So it has been funded 8 years ago, and it's dedicated actually to sustainable city. It brings together, as you can see here, all the best expertise in France regarding the decarbonization of the city, coming from the industrial sector. This you can see on the cycle right side of the slide. So energy companies, engineering companies contribute. Previous slide, please. Still. Then second on the left cycle, in the left cycle, you can look at all the academic sector that contributes and is actually at the board of the institute. And then third, all the local authorities, cities, territories that are actually working closely with us to experiment, innovate, and replicate all the tools and the methodologies that we developed together. So just to answer, the basic of the theme today, the theme that we are addressing today, this is really a case of, how the local authorities and regional and even French government helps directly with a transition at a different scale. So the next slide will show you actually, next slides will show you examples of what we do. This one is actually at a district scale, the comprehensive and software suite that we have developed. So this is something that typically the private sector hasn't done. And we haven't actually yet found any benchmark that would actually compete with what we've done. The first three softwares on the left, Energy Mapper, Screener, and PowerDiz, are dedicated to the optimization of your strategy in energy. So it comes from, the identification of all the sources, renewable and heat recovery, all included, ranking all the best scenarios when it comes, to integrate all the variables that take to calculate your energy optimization. It's very complicated. So this is the software that is dedicated to embark all the data and all the variables that are available. And last, of the energy software, we have crafted a dynamic simulation of selected energy systems all in one interface. So, and in a SaaS mode, which makes it very simple and easy to use. And last, Urban Print is actually the software that can quantify, that can measure precisely the whole assessment of environmental impacts of an urban project, from the designing phase to the construction and exploitation. The second, next slide, if you can help, is we are actually aiming now with France Ville Durable, but with all the French bodies now to actually do exactly what we've done at the district scale, but this is coming to the city scale. So helping with all the climate plan, all the local authorities to make their climate plan very efficient and operational. We have in France a very strong centralized culture, as you know, so it has actually an advantage. We have a 15 years experience of city metropolitan planning. So this is the reason why this has come one of our first objectives to develop those tools. And this is happening now. The next slide will show a roadmap that we have crafted with the CEREMA, which is again a French R&D institute, specialized in different fields. And here we have actually crafted a roadmap that is an award as well, and that comes to complete the European Energy Award based on climate, air, energy. And this is an award that complete to embark and to include the 17 SDGs. So we are now actually launching an URBACT call, European project, URBACT, to involve European cities. There are already 7 cities in France that have been awarded. And we're launching it at an international level. One of the countries that are already launching it is Morocco, with 8 cities, main cities actually. So this is just give you an example of how we work with local authorities, what we have done, and how we can directly support them. So the last slide will show you as well an expertise that we have developed with the Banque des Territoires. Banque des Territoires is actually the bank for the cities in France. So it's the bank that finance, invests, help all local authorities towards their transition. And we have been working with different, development bank, but as well, the ADEME, which is the agency, the French agency for the power, energy, and we have developed in a 5-year time a platform to help with evaluation and replicability of each of the innovation projects. So we became actually a national reference, and we are now scaling up and offering our expertise at a European level with especially mission cities. I don't know if you heard about it. It's about 120 cities in Europe that the European Commission will help become neutral by the end of 2030, which is in 8 years. So it's a huge, huge goal. And we are actually as well working very closely with India, actually. Minal, I guess you must know the National Institute of Urban Affairs, which depends, of Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So we are actually working on different fields with the NIUA, among them monitoring, evaluation, and replicability. So this is just examples, like concrete examples of what we can do and offer to local authorities in France and business cases.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for an interesting presentation. I think having a template monitoring, evaluation, and reporting is a key pillar of robustness and also important for replicability, I guess, because what I see in some parts of the world is different cities doing different things, and then it's harder to compare and measure. So I really enjoyed your presentation. We move to the next one, and I also request the subsequent speakers, because we are not doing very well on time, to please keep to time. So we have Carolina Inella, from ENEA, which is the Italian National Agency for New Technologies, Energy and Sustainable Economic Development. Over to you, Carolina.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. It's an honor to take part to this important meeting. I share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, okay. All right. My presentation today is focused on the transition to circular economy in cities, adopting a systemic approach, since the journey to net zero requires a complete transformation of the economic model and the way we produce and consume. The circularity gap reports last year highlighted that circular economy strategies implemented across sectors and nations have the potential to slash global greenhouse gas emissions by 39%. So highlighting the necessity for circular mitigation strategies. Today, I present two Italian cases studied. The first one implemented in the city of Pesaro. It is the construction of the building of the middle school Antonio Brancati in Pesaro. In 2017, the municipality of Pesaro launched a pilot project with a holistic approach towards circular economy principles to ensure the building design responds to environmental protection, health, and well-being. The decision of the municipality was to reuse an abandoned area for the school, so with zero land consumption, and 3 old army barracks built in 1950 were replaced with the new middle school. The school building excellence is the result of the ambitious commitment of Pesaro municipality to preserve the environment and tackle climate change. The intent was in fact to optimize circularity and enhance the use of sustainable building materials and technologies, so raw materials, and minimize waste from the construction of the building. The call for tender of the municipality described the technical specifications and provided the measurable requirements against which the tenders has been evaluated. 2 criteria were selected as mandatory. First, obtaining a nearly energy zero building school, and 2, the environmental energy certification using LEED certification scheme, achieving at minimum the LEED Gold certification. This project has been internationally awarded with many prizes. It is the most sustainable LEED certified school in Europe with 88 points and the third in the world. At COP26 in Glasgow, as part of the Green Solution Award, this school received the 2020 Energy and Temperate Climates Award, and the school also won an Italian award. The other case study I present is the Genoa action plan for a lighthouse city. So the plan was built around the question, how will cities look like in 2050? Today, we can no longer afford to use the learning by doing methods, but it is necessary to develop a preventive knowledge, a proactive awareness, and to rethink models and the process of sustainable innovation with a holistic and systemic approach to really face the global changes that are climatic, demographic, ecological, and digital transitions. So at the end of 2019, the municipality of Genoa approved a strategic visioning document called Genoa Lighthouse City, where it traced a participatory route focused on 3 assets. The gray asset, that is the development of infrastructures, networks, and communications. The green asset, it is the broad spectrum of urban regeneration, and soft, the development of the many communities and business. So 3 systemic goals: innovation, anticipation, and awareness, and an implementation program based on 12 priority action areas in line with the international agenda. The action plan timeline began in 2019, and with a complex multi-level roadmap looks forward 2050. So that's all for many informations. These are the link for the 2 case studies. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Carolina. 5 minutes, 55 seconds, not bad at all. And I also like the integration of the gray, green, and soft infrastructure, and especially given the renewed focus on green infrastructure, it is an important element to include. We will move to the next presentation. The next speaker is Anya Pierbert. Is Anya here? Tomoko-san, can you confirm?
Yes. Anya-san is the health condition is not good, so that she cannot make it. Yeah.
Right, no problem. Thank you so much for confirming. And so we have the final speaker for this section, Kenji Asakawa. So Kenji-san works at the Institute of Global Environmental Strategies, IGS, on legal framework of carbon tax, but he also works on strategies for controlling urban development to achieve low carbon and sustainable cities. Over to you, Kenji-san.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Secretariat, for giving me this opportunity. So today I'm going to introduce Zero Carbon City initiative led by Ministry of the Environment, Japan, and share my brief preliminary analysis on local government's readiness towards carbon neutral in 2050, and brief recommendation on the support from the central government to the local governments. Okay, next slide, please. So the Ministry of Environment Japan has been taking the Zero Carbon City initiative to engage local governments to become carbon neutral by 2050. The number of local governments which officially announced declaration of carbon neutral in 2050 has been increased to 761 as of the end of November. And it's around 44% of total number of local governments in Japan. However, the population size of the declared city is biased in terms of financial strength and population size. So you can look at the chart on your left-hand side. It shows the relationship between population size and the average of fiscal strength or declaration rate. So you can see high correlation between the fiscal capacity and declaration rate. And more than half of local governments which weak fiscal capacity has not yet declared. So in the chart on your right-hand side, you can see those cities of small and medium-sized population have around 27% share of total emissions in Japan. So especially cities from 30,000 to 100,000 seems a kind of volume zone for the GHG emission reduction. On the other hand, the smaller size cities less than 10,000 or 5,000 seems to have not so much reduction potential, but they would have more potential for renewable energy resources, especially solar power, and they should be targeted in different way. So I would say we cannot leave them behind towards national carbon neutral target, of course. And considering the level of the declaration rate represents the level of progress or readiness in their climate action, those small and medium-sized cities of less than 100,000 population may need external supports, including technical and personal supports. Okay, next, please. So this is the last slide on my presentation, and it's a brief recommendation from my side. So in order to achieve carbon neutral throughout Japan, so 3 points highlighted here. So do not leave small and medium-sized cities behind, of course, and provide national policy interventions of technical and personal supports. And supports their own climate action planning first, and then implementation their plan, especially local renewable energy development. So first, most of the small and medium sized cities do not have their own climate action plan. So first, external support needs to support their climate action planning, and then implementation stage next. Okay, I'll stop here for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Perfect. And the role of finance and the importance of including all types of cities. We call our large cities the usual suspects. So all the funding, all the attention, all the strategies are around those cities. They are the ones that are highlighted, which gives the impression a lot is happening. And often the small and medium-sized cities do not get their share of funding. So yeah, very useful point. And I would just pick up from your slides on the national support. And just to open up the discussion, you know, cities are nested within this multi-level governance structure, and often in many parts of the world, cities do not have capacity or powers, definitely financial capacity, but also powers, and rely on the national or the state government, especially in our case. So I wonder if the speakers could sort of broadly reflect on recommendations on what kind of national support could be provided to enable zero carbon cities. So maybe Janet, you turned on your camera first. I will go to you.
Okay, thank you. So what kinds of national support? That's a good question, in the sense that I will talk about the British context, but there are lots of very familiar themes from across the presentations there, I think. But in Britain, we still have very centralised government and very centralised control, particularly over finances, despite the fact we have devolved national governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And in the research that we've done, we've argued that the first step to make the ambitious plans attainable across scales in the UK, particularly in Britain, because it's Britain that has the single energy market at the moment. What needs to change is that central government, the UK government, needs to make clear that there is a mandate, a policy mandate in place for net zero carbon localities, city regions, if you like. That's not there at the moment. So what we've seen in our research, the qualitative side of that research, is a lot of doubt expressed amongst local officials about whether they really should be acting on carbon and clean energy, because there are so many other pressures on their resources, particularly in the current economic context, worsened by war in Ukraine, of course. What we're seeing is cities drawing back and saying, well, we have to focus on our immediate duties, which are around social care, and we don't have the means to do more. So without that very clear direction from central governments, making that a central plank of energy and climate policy, I think we will continue to see small-scale experiments, but not really the whole systemic change that we've been talking about.
No, I do agree with you. Thank you so much. I do agree with you because you do have national targets, but I think there's also, just to add to your point, a need to bring the urban focus on national targets. So national governments not only need to have overall low carbon targets, but something to say what cities should be doing or can be doing with national support. I'm sorry, Isabel has to leave. I see it in chat, no problem. Thank you for coming in. But I might just pass on to the next, maybe to the French case study and say, what is your experience about adding to Janet's point?
I guess Janet is right. In France, we have a lot of things done in terms of regulations and public policies. We have a national strategy for low carbon. We have different schemes for climate, air, and energy at territorial level. We have recovery and ecological transition contracts also dealing with carbon neutrality. And in addition, we have many competitive calls for projects with funds available operated by public operators, such as l'ADEME, the Agency for Ecological Transition in France, or La Banque des Territoires, which was mentioned by Isabel. But what is still lacking is basically a work culture enabling to overcome administrative and sectoral silos. This is a very challenging question of carbon neutrality, which needs a very systemic approach, and we are not very much used to working this way. And that's why in France we are very much capitalizing on the EU missions aforementioned to build a very multi-level governance network and a new way of working all together at the national, EU regional level and territory level, and involving all the relevant stakeholders, be it research, businesses, local authorities and companies, to try to overcome these silos and have a very broad overview of what needs to be done at territorial scale. That's why I would say for France.
Thanks so much. And I was really impressed by the level of partnerships you got in the city slides that you presented on the plans. It's rare, I suppose, in some contexts in the global south to have that active participation from the private sector. And I wonder, Kenji, if you wanted to elaborate a little bit on the last slide where you also mentioned a similar point.
Yeah, thank you very much. So in the case of Japan, regarding technical and personal support from the central government, we need to identify differences in capacity and demands of local governments to accept those supports. And for example, the medium-sized city, technical consultation alone may be sufficient, but the small-sized city, they would need technical experts to be dispatched for the policy making on others.
Right, and is it also right? So is it just the number of people you mean, or just building the capacity of the existing municipalities?
Yeah, we can take both, I think. It depends on the demands and capacity of the small scale governments. Yes.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I would like to sort of transition to another question, and it is also reading from Carolina's presentation from the school case study. And in my university, we had a Times ranking sheet where they asked us when our university will be carbon neutral. It was a tough form to fill, and increasingly bottom-up initiatives are needed to meet the city targets, as maybe Janet would agree, or from the French case study, right? And so I wonder if you wanted to, Carolina, briefly touch upon this question about how universities or research institutes support and collaborate with local governments on achieving the zero carbon plan.
Yeah, thank you. In Italy, we have an important initiative implemented and coordinated by our organization, Enea. This is the Italian Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform called ISESP. It is a mirror platform at the Italian level of the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform. It was founded in 2018, and we have nowadays more than 800 participants coming from public institutions, private sector, research, academic, and civil society. And the city of Pesaro and the city of Genoa are members of our platform. So the platform carries out the activities through 6 working groups, and among them there is the working group Circular Cities and Territories that I am proud to coordinate together other colleagues. In particular, through the activities of this group, we support and collaborate with local and regional governments in many ways, and above all aiming to suggest practical actions that city leaders can adopt and to promote and accelerate the transition towards a circular economy. First of all, our support is through the identification, collection, and analysis of good practice at urban level, implemented not only in Italy, but also in Europe. But also we support local governments to the analysis of needs and gaps through meetings, webinars, and talks with experts, with survey, and through the publication of reports and papers. Moreover, the activities of this working group are in synergy with other European initiatives, such as the Leadership Group Cities and Regions of the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform that is coordinated by ACR Plus, and the European Circular Cities Declaration coordinated by ICLEI. And from Enea side, we support local and regional government also through our many research European or national funded projects, and through sharing our knowledge and our technological results. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are getting close to the hour, but I do want to get some final remarks, and I don't have a question in mind, but really the reflection on cities is that yes, cities are doing a lot, but there is a lot more to be done or needed to get there. And the IPCC report gives out this very clearly, saying that we need rapid, deep emission reductions. And so the key is acceleration and scale. And I wonder if all of you, not necessarily on this point, but what would be your one takeaway point that you would like to give here? So I request you to keep it to a minute, maybe, if possible. So Janet, we'll follow the order of the presentations. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I would echo the end of the previous session, which is to say, collaboration is critical here. And of course, we're not seeing enough of that. It's there in part, but not with sufficient political impetus perhaps behind it. You know, I'm a social scientist, so I would say that the challenge is to solve the collective actor problem. We've seen this again and again in our case studies, that although in principle we get the key actors, the key parties round the table together to talk about decarbonising energy, for instance, in an area of the city like Edinburgh is a case where I live and also have researched. And we see that all of those partners, the private, commercial sector and the public sector, are willing in principle and see the value and have good feasibility studies which show the carbon saving and other benefits locally from investing in clean energy at city scale. But then ultimately, all of the reporting requirements on those key actors have different essential demands on them. So they all report according to different performance indicators, basically. And that forces them back into a position of competition rather than collaboration with each other, because they are all in silos, crudely. They can't effect that kind of collaboration at area city scale without breaking the rules against which they are assessed and against which their performance is measured. So yes, it's that, and needing those critical metrics, not to be forcing competitive advantage and least short-term cost, but to be looking at net zero and fastest carbon reductions right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. Maybe Marianne, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I agree with Janet. I mean, cooperation is very powerful between all the relevant stakeholders. But as you all know, carbon neutrality at a scale of a territory doesn't mean anything, because it's a global challenge for everyone. So international cooperation is also very powerful to share joint difficulties and find collective actions, and basically accelerate replication and upscales of what is proven to be efficient on one territory and then can easily be adapted to other local contexts. So I mean, that's why we are working towards in France Vie Durable as well, to foster collaboration and exchange of best practices between cities.
Thank you so much. Do you want to go next, Galvina?
I agree with Janet and Marion, but moreover, within the activities of the working group of the Italian platform, and also within the activities of the European stakeholder platform, we have identified some key elements for city leaders and policy makers. First, increasing the awareness and the inclusion of stakeholders and citizens, and not forgetting young people through the co-creation approach from the initial design to the implementation, decision-making and governance. This is very important because it fosters a shared sense of responsibility, ownership and pride. And then setting out a strategic agenda, establishing clear goals with a citywide vision. The case of Genoa could be very inspirational. Then set up circular targets and metrics, build capacity and share knowledge in cooperation with research institutes and universities. And finally, promote new finance initiatives and support circular models like public procurement, as we have seen in the case study of Pesaro. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
Wonderful. I definitely agree on the targets part. Kenji-san, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm also echoing the importance of collaboration and cooperation, as the other speakers said. In the context of Japan, in the context of external support system, it should be developed in nationwide, and such supporting system, it would be time-consuming and cost-consuming to build such system from scratch. So better to utilize the existing system, which has local offices in each area and network connecting them. So we should explore some best candidate for that purpose.
Thank you so much. And I mean, I agree with all the points, and I just wanted to sort of highlight also to the listeners, the audience, that we, from the IPCC report, we published a summary for urban policymakers, synthesizing the urban messages from the IPCC report for city governments leaders. It was co-created by businesses, city leaders, and IPCC authors. And a lot of these points are reflected in that one as well, which says that cities we know the solutions. We know we need to electrify our transport. We need to make our buildings more efficient. We need to include nature-based solutions. But I think one of the things that did not come out today in the talks, and maybe because of time as well, was the demand side actions. That how do you, because cities can only go to net zero looking at the supply chain, so within and outside the city. So that is also something that's highlighted in our recent report about what kind of nudges, what kind of, we call them choice architectures, that how are choices presented to people for them to be able to make those choices. And so we'll need both technology and demand side. But I think clear targets, partnership, monitoring, reporting, and evaluation, bottom-up initiatives from Carolina's presentation, gray, green, and soft infrastructure. So I think we have a lot of takeaways, but to me, really governance and finance stands out among all the enabling conditions. But I don't know if you would agree with me or not, but really to enable it to happen, cities need to have the power and the capacity and resources. And especially speaking a bit strongly from the global south, that resources become a big constraint in enabling. So I really liked your point, Jeanette, about co-benefits. And if we could, we know a lot of urban actions have synergies and co-benefits with the Sustainable Development Goals. And sometimes they become key entry points in prioritizing urban actions. Even for a systems approach, if we could show synergies with actions across sectors, that would at least enable faster adoption. But we can't do it without stakeholders. So the partnerships point, I guess, is also equally important. So we are on the hour, and I think, yeah, that's a wrap up. So thanks for all your very interesting insights, and I pass it over back to the Secretariat. So thank you so much from my side.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for the panelists. And that now that we all finished yesterday and today's sessions, thank you once again. Thank you very much for joining us. So see you next time. Thank you
So much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.